Thanks, everyone. So really nice to be here. First-time speaker, lots of attending at BSides Boulder. I'm a local Boulderite, so just grateful that you all were able to come out here and visit. Notice that none of the talks that I've seen before have done a land acknowledgement. So it's a pretty common thing at the university to do a land acknowledgement at the beginning of an academic presentation. There is even one actually there is the words of one taped to the podium here for someone to read if they didn't know what the words were. I just wanted to take a moment to acknowledge the fact that this beautiful courtroom, the Whittekind building, there's a plaque on the back of the room that explains who the Whittekind family was and how they studied law at CU for 3 generations and founded a really important law firm and have been involved in Colorado law for a long time. But this building wouldn't be here. None of the city would be here if people had not moved in and pushed out the native people who camped and lived in this area for thousands of years before we came. And that really kind of came to a head about 150 years ago when there was a group of Army officials and people from this area who were riled up with stories about people being attacked by the native population. And they were basically brought into a big group, about 600, 700 people who were armed, were taken out to the Eastern Plains, and a large tribe of native people who were under a flag of truce with the then Colorado Territory were slaughtered in their beds while they slept, mostly women and children. It was called the Sand Creek Massacre, and it is the reason that Colorado was able to form as a state, because it removed a large native population that were asserting their property and land rights over these areas. And Boulder is not a stranger to this level of hate and violence in its history, but it is one that we benefit from. So why do we do these land acknowledgements? Is because we recognize that this happened. I was not personally responsible for this. Nobody in this room was, but we're all benefiting from it. And so what I'd like to do is just say that the reason that I am doing this talk is to prove that there is a use, that this destruction and harm that was done on peoples is being used for good and to benefit the community. So that's why I'm doing this. All right. Thank you for coming. The talk is about smishing and quishing. What are those things? Well, to talk about that, let me give you a little bit of my background. So I work in threat research. I've worked for a bunch of big companies. As I mentioned, I live here in Boulder. If you see any buffaloes, please don't pet the large fuzzy animals. I also volunteer at Technology Museum that's here on campus. It's the largest collection of functional obsolete technology in North America that we know of, in the form of a sort of exhibit space where you can visit and use the machines. So afterwards, after the last session and after the closing remarks, I will be meeting in the lobby, and if people want to go over and tour the Media Archaeology Lab, I will take you over there. I also work in a lot of technology policy space. I've been doing a lot of policy advocacy work for the last 3 or 4 years. I founded an organization called Elect More Hackers because I realized that most of our policy issues that are most pressing involve technology, and most of our legislators are not technical. So we need more technically capable legislators, which is why I'm inviting people who work in this industry to reach out to me. If you are interested in running for office at any level in the United States, let me help you get started. All right. Oh, and I should mention, as a side note, that while I am currently not employed, I am on the board of an organization called World Cyber Health. And World Cyber Health is operating a number of projects that are benefiting the cybersecurity community, the biggest of which is called Malware Village. So, surprise, surprise, if you know that DEF CON has lots and lots of villages, you may not have realized that they have never had a malware village, ever. So this year at DEF CON is going to be the inaugural year for a malware village. The purpose of it is to bring up the next generation of analysts and researchers who want to work in this space, because we are currently in a workforce crisis in the malware analysis space, and we need more people to join our ranks and to be doing this work. I can't do it all myself, and probably neither can you. So if you are going to be at DEF CON, please come to Malware Village. We're going to have talks, workshops, and contests. Right. So let's talk a little bit about what this is. So we're going to talk about the terminology. We're going to talk about a quishing attack that was targeted against my prior employer that persisted for several months and got more and more elaborate as time went on. We're going to talk a little bit about the nexus between quishing and smishing. And then we're going to talk about my proposal for how we can fix both of these problems with a single technology solution, but it needs cooperation. And then we're going to talk a little bit about how we get cooperation in an environment in which we cannot depend on it. So let's talk about the language. So everyone knows what a QR code is. I've got a lot of examples here. These are all just pictures taken of QR codes from all over town. They are ubiquitous. We all know what they do is that for most people, you take a picture with your phone and it gives you a link to go to in your phone's browser. So it is just a method of clicking a link that has a physical, so instead of having a hot link on a web page, you have a physical object that has this QR code on it and you can take a picture of it. But QR codes are actually pretty expansive. They can contain any number of different variety of data, not just URLs. So they're really, really useful for tons of different things. Phishing. Who here doesn't know what phishing is, right? It's stealing information by posing as something that you're supposed to log into. It's a way of stealing passwords. Smishing. So smishing is the use of SMS or text messaging on phones to send those phishing links to people. So just like in spam, when you can get emailed a thing that says that you need to reset your email password, you can get a link in your messages that say, oh, you've got an overdue toll from driving on a toll road in Texas. So you should go here and pay, and it just collects your information. Now, quishing. Quishing is just taking a different QR code and using it in a malicious way. So you, just like you would use the QR code on the signs for the parking meters to pay for your parking when you park on the street, you take a sticker with a QR code that goes to a page that looks just like the one where you would enter your credit card details, and you stick it over the one that's printed on the sign, and many people would not be the wiser, although some would probably recognize that, hey, there's like a weirdly angled sticker that's not the same color as the sign, and goes to a website that has nothing to do with the parking website that I normally visit, and they might notice, but many won't, and it's a bad way to have your stuff stolen. So we are in a situation right now where quishing is becoming a really bad problem for a lot of us. It's gone mainstream. And as I mentioned, the QR codes that this rely on, this is not new technology. Even though we think that QR codes are relatively recent, they actually were invented in the early 1990s by a Japanese car manufacturer they were using robots to move parts into place on an automated assembly line, and they needed to be able to read which part they need to validate that the robot was picking up the correct part and putting it in the right orientation. And so they invented this thing, and then they open sourced it. And what a boon it has been to have QR codes, because they're incredibly useful. However, almost as long as QR codes have existed, people have been rickrolling others with QR codes and doing other slightly more harmful things with QR codes because they are not human readable. As a practice, doing the kind of work that I do, where I look at spam and other kinds of abusive stuff that happens over the internet, we really started to see, even though there was talk about small numbers of like parking meter signs being stickered over with QR codes, we didn't really see any kind of real pickup of malicious actors abusing QR codes until 2023. And then last year, it really started to ramp up and get bad. And one of the things I wanted to point out here is that this screenshot, even though it's very hard to read, That is a physical ransom letter that was mailed in the post to someone. It has a photograph of the front of their house on the first page, and a long list of details about the person's life in the letter, and it concludes with a ransom demand in Bitcoin, and the QR code at the end is to the person's Bitcoin wallet. So we can see that there are a lot of ways that they can be abused. But let's talk about this one, because it was a pretty interesting attack. My prior employer is a company called Sophos. They make firewalls, but they also do endpoint security and have EDR and MDR services available. They do a variety of different things. One of the projects that we had over the long period of time that I was employed there is a project on radical transparency. So when the company itself was attacked in a variety of different ways, we would do analysis on it, and then we would publish it as blogs. We would talk about it at conferences. If you're going to be at Black Hat or DEF CON this year, I'll be talking about one of those attacks that I wrote up last year called Pacific Rim. But this is a different one. So this was one where employees at Sophos were targeted with these QR codes that were malicious, and that they were sent with emails that looked like this. So typical message that we got when we were getting these attacks was, it looked like a document that was scanned, or sometimes it was like a SharePoint link to download something that was an important HR-related or finance or payroll-related document. All of these basically contained the same thing. They said, here's a document that contains something that's obviously financial related, it's got a file name, and it's got an attachment that's a PDF. Now, most systems at large security companies, when we would see these kinds of things, we would not just follow all the links in the email, but we also would detonate any payload, any attachment in a sandbox. And the thing about this attack is that there is no malicious code inside of that attachment. It is just a picture, and the picture looks like this. So you can see it actually has Sophos's logo in the PDF. It had a QR code. It referenced that there was some DocuSign-related need to click this with your phone, even though it was being emailed to your desk. You needed to open it with a QR code, which would then require you to use your phone. So we got clued into this because the employee who got this said, oh, it just kind of seemed a little off. Like, this doesn't seem like a normal HR document. And they were right. And when we continued to look, we found many, many more of these. So this is what happened when you took a picture of it with your phone, and if you were careful, you could see the link without accidentally tapping the button that says open link, which was really hard to miss with my fat fingers. But this is what I do. So I run a lab here in Boulder out of my home where I detonate malware in a controlled environment, and I allow it to persist for as long as it will run on virtual machines, bare metal machines. I have phones, I have older computers, and I do this so that I can observe the network traffic and make determinations about what the malware is doing and how it's communicating and what's being sent and what's being received back by the malware. So of course I clicked this link because I wanted to see where it was going to go. If you look at the screenshot, and this is just what I did was I used the camera in the phone to take the picture, and then I tried to manage it so that you could see the entire URL, and then I did a screenshot. That's actually really hard to do on an Android phone. I don't know how easy it would be to do on an Apple, but what you can see is that it was going to some website, drive.sharedfiledrive.com, and then after that was the actual email address of the employee that had received the message. So the QR code that was in the PDF had embedded within it the email address of the target, which was pretty interesting. Like that's a level of detail that I was not expecting. And so when we got there, we were presented with a pretty standard like Microsoft 365 login for the credentials for the person's account. We were prompted just before we got that with a Cloudflare CAPTCHA, which was a little weird, but like, okay, so we're human, and when we got through to that, we actually got to the O365 login page. And this is something that when, at our company, which was it's an Office shop, a Microsoft shop, so this is normal for most people. It would not be unusual to be prompted in this way and for you to have to log in and then also get a push to get your MFA code from the Authenticator app that we were using, which you then have to enter in another screen. In one case, we found that an employee, even though people at my company were trained 18 hours of security training every year on a variety of topics, but including an hour and a half of phishing and anti-malware training, the person got fooled by this page because it was so realistic. And the reality is, that is a real Microsoft 365 login. It was framed inside of a malicious page that was capturing everything that was typed, but it is a real login. So this is called adversary in the middle, T1557 and the attack framework. It's just fascinating to me that this was happening. But it was not the only version of this attack. So with very little effort, we were able to find a few more examples of this pretty quickly that had targeted other employees. These were not folks who work in the research team. They were mainly targeted at HR and people who worked in finance, and some who worked in sales. So the one thing that we could put together that connected all of these employees is that they had a public social media profile that connected their work and the kind of work that they did and the company, so that they were discoverable through sort of OSINT techniques, that they worked at Sophos and they worked in a certain role at Sophos, and who their colleagues were, because they were also connected to those people. So we saw that a bunch of these people had received these messages. Not all of the people who received them opened them or tried to do the QR code thing. In fact, it was very few of them that even tried. Most of them just saw it, recognized it as being weird, and deleted it, which is great. This is the way you want it to be. As time went on, though, and we were seeing more and more of these attacks, you could see that the difference between this is pretty simplistic and boring and not a very realistic looking document. This is a little closer to what you might get if you were doing Office 365 document sharing. And then this is pretty close to something that you would see if you were using DocuSign. So this was another attack that we saw just a few weeks after the first one. We got this one in sort of mid-September last year, and you can see the attackers even embedded the DocuSign logo in the middle of the QR code. That is something that it's actually legal in the QR spec, is that you can put images in the middle of QR codes. If you create a QR code with Chrome, for example, it always puts a little dinosaur right in the center. So this one, it also had, you started to see more embedding of personal information, not just in the QR code, but in the PDF itself. So it had the person's name, it had their department that they worked in, had their email address in a couple different places, and other things that were relevant to them and made it more plausible, right? And the thing with most phishing attacks is that you're just trying to be plausible enough to think that in a snap decision, and one random employee might actually click the thing and enter the credentials before they realize what was going on. There was also footer text that was boilerplate. So we did start to see, the messages that we were receiving were basically the same repetitive content over and over again, which is, in my experience, is a sign that it was a phishing kit and not just a one-off, someone trying to sort of target us and do individual, QR codes for the specific people. But yes, they were inserting their name, the department, logos, sometimes their phone number, usually their email address into the body of the message. And all of it, again, was just a typical, we want you to open this PDF. The PDF is benign. There's no scripting in it. It's just a QR code. And we realized that our processes did not take into account the need that as part of sandboxing a PDF, you need to take a screenshot of it and start looking at that data. So that was something that we used to improve our sandbox after the fact. So here's a fun thing. So we discovered that the phishing kit that we were seeing being used against us is from a group called itself Onyx. And the Onyx phishing kit is advertised online, and it, like a lot of crimeware, has a lot of highfalutin promises about the way that it operates. The gist of it is that it used to be a phishing kit called Caffeine, and it rebranded itself sometime last year. There's a really great blog post by this person from Eclectic IQ that talks about this specific phishing kit and the way that it embeds the Cloudflare CAPTCHA as a sort of process blocker for automation, along with this embedded iframe of a Microsoft login page. So it is, with 90% certainty, it was that phishing kit that was being used against us, but they're not the only one. There's also one called Tycoon 2FA and Rockstar 2FA. That also do the same kind of behavior, follow the same kind of patterns as a way of the Cloudflare CAPTCHA sabotages researchers who want to do analysis of these things at a fast rate, because the CAPTCHA will stop the automation most of the time. But then once you get through it, everything else about the way that it works is the same. It's an iframed page with the Microsoft login inside of it. Did I jump a page? All right, so let's talk about smishing. So smishing, as I mentioned, is using SMS to send URLs, which again, you tap in your text messaging app, whatever it is, and it then opens up a browser to whatever the link is. So smishing has been problematic for a while. I think we all know that, like, besides the fact that we're getting nonstop political SMS messages that are just incredibly annoying, there are lots and lots of these sort of more malicious ones that want you to believe that you have a traffic ticket that needs to be paid, that there's a warrant out for your arrest and you need to pay bail, you have a toll for driving on a toll road that you need to pay, or some other thing that requires some kind of urgency for you to jump and immediately do it. And these can range in sophistication from just really boring plain text to fully graphicalized, things like this TX tag, which, by the way, is the name of Texas's toll system, and the link that's in this screenshot is a link that is not to the legitimate website. So all of these things are really bad, really common, and where we're starting to see the crossover is that all of these things rely on your phone, right? The QR code reader, the text message phishing attacks, all of them want you to be off the laptop, off the desktop, which has firewall protection. It might have endpoint protection. It may have something in the browser that, like Safe Browse, that would tell you if you were leading to a page that is known to be used for phishing or is suspicious or just got registered yesterday. But on your phone, you don't have these things. So because mobile devices aren't really well protected, they are the next sort of target space for fraudsters and just general cyber criminals who are trying to do these kinds of attacks. Funny enough, the Swiss government, through the Swiss post office, did a phishing test of its entire population. They sent text messages to people with fake links in them, encouraging the population to come and pay something to the post office. And when they landed on the page in their browser, it was this one, and it says, "Oops, you've been phished." And this is the level of training that most people never receive. I mean, we work in the security field, so we are aware of these things. But seriously, show of hands, if you've got more than one person in your family who would be fooled by one of these links, right? So it's not one or two of us, right? There's a lot of us. We don't have this level of user education at any level in this country unless you work at a company that does this kind of training internally. So This problem, quishing, smishing, here's my proposal, right? So we need to fix this. We're the security industry. This is bad links. This is a solvable problem. It's a problem that has been solved on the desktop. So how do we solve it on a mobile device? It's going to take some cooperation, right? Here's where I think that we need to work hard. It's going to take working with the companies that make mobile, smartphone OSs, so Android and iOS, right? Apple and Google need to be on board with this. And, in addition, the mobile phone providers that the data is traversing and who also are, sending the SMS to your phones, they need to be on board as well, because as part of this fix, there needs to be a feedback loop so that the numbers that are being used to send these messages are cut off, so that once they've done it once, the feedback loop works immediately and cuts it off so that no one else receives that message. A lot of security companies, like the one I used to work for and a bunch of the other ones that I used to work for, actually all have URL reputation services. We have vast, deep knowledge of domains that are doing bad things, have done bad things in the past, or are hosted in what are known as like bad neighborhoods on the internet, right? IP ranges that are known to be used by bulletproof hosts. We have to be tied in with this. So does Cloudflare, for instance, because Cloudflare, in serving this role as this gatekeeper and having these these CAPTCHAs that prevent automation from getting these pages, Cloudflare has to be on board with this fix. And then finally, we need to have a system similar to what they did in Switzerland with that, with user education, so people understand what is quishing, what is phishing. I was just in the hallway and listening to a couple of people talking about this talk just before it started, and the one person said, quishing and smishing, it sounds kind of sexual, and I wish I knew what those things were. And I'm really worried that we come up with goofy names for all of these different ways of just defrauding people, but the reality is it's all the same thing. It's just a scam. So we need to have this willingness to collaborate and work together and not do it in a way that advantages one platform over the other or one company over the other. It does take a little bit of altruism, and what that means is some companies made to sacrifice a tiny bit of profit, but it is for the good of all of us. So I am not a graphic designer. I am a security researcher, so I apologize that this diagram is pretty crappy. But here is my initial thought on the way that this works, is that you basically build in a reputation checking layer between the mobile phone browser and the camera, right? The camera is what you use to load the link out of the QR code. It then pushes that directly to the mobile phone browser. So what do? You put in some code in there, a piece of something that goes and does a checkup out to the cloud to look up whether something is bad or not. And if it's bad, doesn't let you go there, blocks it. Simple, right? This is what Smart Browse does on the desktop. However, if you use Chrome on a mobile device, even though it has Smart Browse embedded within it, it is somewhat hobbled. So it doesn't have the daily update of the full malicious list of domains that is in Smart Browse that's on Safe Browse, that's on the desktop. It's not in your mobile device. And because cloud lookups cause delay and slow things down, which is kind of a good thing in this case, a lot of browsers just won't do it. But that's, I think, a problem that we need to get over and just realize that we're going to have to take 2 or 3 seconds extra to wait for a page to load so that we know that our QR codes that we're clicking on are safe. And if it's safe, we go there, we open the page, we're looking at the menu at the restaurant, we're paying our, we're paying for our parking, we're paying for movie tickets, whatever it is, right? We're able to use our QR code safely. But then I started thinking, okay, so here's that connection, right? The camera is sending the URLs to the browser, so is the SMS device. So now you just have this shared reputation checker. have it hooked out of anywhere that can send a link to your browser. So right now I've just got text messaging and a camera up there. It could include your email client, could include Signal or anything else that you're using, Zoom, Teams, anything where you would click a link and go to the browser, goes through the reputation checker. And so you've got this fork where like this is just a piece that it all has to go through the funnel, and then it gets to be, processed and you're safe or not. Well, what's the other problem? One of the problems that we were seeing in the later versions of the Quishing attacks is that those QR codes were actually pointing at Google links. So this was a fun twist. After they figured out that we had figured out what their bad domain was and blocked it, they started using a trick that allows you to use www.google.com and then a long query string to create a 302 redirect to their website. So what happens if you do a reputation check against the QR code is you just get the reputation of www.google.com, which is going to be, hey, it's all okay. But if you have this layer in the middle that resolves these 302 redirects and at least gets you to maybe not all the way to the phishing page, but might get you to the page that's hosting that Cloudflare CAPTCHA, which is usually the malicious website, then you can have a reputation off of that, and that's usually going to be good enough. So we have this resolver piece, the little hexagon. Now there's another part of it. So we live in an era in which people feel like they have less control over their devices than they've ever had. And there is a growing movement of people in the tech industry who recognize that this is a problem and that choice and consent among users is important. So we include an ability in this hypothetical process for users to insert their own reputation checker URLs, so you're not reliant on whatever Apple chooses if you're on iOS or whatever Google chooses if you're on Android, or you can have multiples. I use a tool at home called a Pi-hole. It's a software that runs on a Raspberry Pi, and it acts as a local DNS server on my network. And the reason that I use it is not just to speed up my browsing by fixing DNS, which is fantastic, but it speeds up my browsing because it takes as a feed lists of domains that are known to be used by advertising and advertising tracking companies, and it just local hosts all of them, so that zero IPs every ad-related domain. You can then choose which provider of a list of advertising-related domains you want to rely on, and there's several that are, just independently run, by people who believe in the purpose of this project. And it is a no-brainer to imagine that security companies would want to do this, that there are individual groups of security researchers and other folks out in the world who are already doing this for things like the Pi-hole, that they could just repurpose this list-making facility for something of this nature and give people access to those URLs, which you would then be able to pick and choose either through a pick list or just paste the URL into a config file or a UI that allows you to add dynamically whatever URL you want to use to do your lookups, and then do the lookup and have it return, good or bad verdict on things. You would be running your own private URL void or VirusTotal, on your device using the providers that you trust the most. And then finally, the feedback loop, because it's not good enough to just look and see if something's bad, because the biggest problem that we see with phishing in general is that the domain pops up and within 10 minutes it's being used in phishing attacks, sometimes even before the DNS resolution for the phishing domain has propagated through the internet. So it's so fast that nobody can keep up with it. And the security industry has had this as a problem for ages and ages. I mean, back when I worked at Blue Coat, this was the biggest problem that we had, was that the volume of malicious domains being registered and then being switched on for use for 30 minutes and then switched off again, and then not used for 3 years and then switched back on for an hour and then switched off again is a huge problem. But it is not an unsolvable problem. And one of the ways that we've done that is we have things like the Cyber Threat Alliance, where 37 different very large security companies share TTPs and threat intelligence about malicious file hashes, URIs, any number of, there's something like 80 different metadata attributes about files and websites that they share with each other in real time. And every one of those companies has access to that data and can incorporate it into its own product the way that it wants. Because the philosophy behind that is that in the security industry, the data about the threat actors, we are all on the same side, right? The security industry is trying to block the bad guys. We are all allies in this fight. How we compete is on price and technology and the services we provide and the stuff that we do for you as a customer. What we should not be competing on is the content of that threat intelligence. It does no one any good for one company to keep secret all of the threat intel that they know and no one else knows, because that threat intel, while it is valuable to that company for a very short time, it becomes very invaluable over a very short time frame. And as long as we can share and use that to enhance all of our protections, suddenly we're all better and the bad guys are on the back foot. What an idea, right? So that's the proposal. This weird little loop that I've created of a funnel that takes all the bad data, checks it, and then if it's bad, let everyone else know. Pretty simple, right? Here's the problem that we live in. It's 2025, in the year of our Lord, and shitification is upon us everywhere, in every industry. And we can no longer count on companies, especially large companies, to do the right thing because they recognize it's the right thing. If there is a nickel to be made for doing the wrong thing, I think we all know what the choice is going to be. So we have to work on this, all of us. Everybody who's watching this right now, if you work in a security company, recognize that you're a piece of this solution and that you could help. And the way that you help is by making the case to your management that this is an incredibly important thing to do. And the first place where this needs to happen is in Alphabet and at Apple. Because without their cooperation to build the reputation checking layer that goes in between their browsers and everything else that sends stuff to the browser, none of this happens. So the first thing is that they have to recognize that this is valuable and useful and beneficial to every one of the people who use an Android or an iOS phone. The mobile phone providers actually have an incentive to do this as well, because they don't like this SMS traffic traversing their network. They have to pay for that. So cutting out bad SMS numbers as quickly as you possibly can saves them money, costs them less. That's good for them. I don't think that'll be a problem. Most of the security companies in the industry are now part of one or more information sharing collectives, right? So I mentioned the Cyber Threat Alliance, but there are other similar trust groups. And it is incredibly important that we all stay together on this and keep our eyes on the prize. The prize is making sure bad guys don't win, making sure criminals cannot earn a living off of our most vulnerable members of society who are the most gullible and click or tap every link that they get, regardless of whether it's, good or bad. And we do have to have a conversation about Cloudflare, because Cloudflare is a service provider to some of these criminal networks. And they are disincentivized to cooperate on this because cutting off those criminals is to lose money. And it's a problem. They're really popular among phishing sites. Right now, Cloudflare CAPTCHA blockers seem to appear on something like 50 to 75% of phishing pages when you go to them initially. If it is not some janky, Script Kiddie, who's created their very first, Fisher Price, My First Phishing Kit, you are going to get something that looks like this, that is going to check and make sure that you're a human. And the reason that they're able to do that is because they are actually buying Cloudflare services. They are using Cloudflare as their content delivery mechanism. It masks the IP address of where their site is really hosted because it's being mirrored out of all of Cloudflare's data centers. And they get the benefit of these human checkers, which screws up the security industry. So I couldn't originally understand why a criminal would want to use this, but once I started looking at how big of a problem this is, this is super beneficial. Why pay some Russian bulletproof host for your hosting services when you could just go legit with Cloudflare? It's really problematic. In addition, because Cloudflare is not the host, they are just mirroring hosted content from elsewhere. When you report bad stuff to Cloudflare, they pass your report on to the web host and to the website owner directly. You don't have a choice. You see how these checkboxes are grayed out? You cannot unselect that. They will pass your report on to the web host. Well, if you're running a criminal enterprise and you only host phishing pages, places that do malware command and control, and other bad stuff, what are you going to do when Cloudflare sends you a polite email that says, hey, we noticed there's some bad stuff on your network? Yeah, so what? So we have a real problem with legitimate business. I would not want to characterize this as Cloudflare is partnering with criminals, because that is not what they're doing, and they clearly don't want that. But they're so big and they're so incapable of recognizing the scale of this problem. They need some help from all of us as well. This is one where we all need to work together to teach them, how do we do reporting so we don't dox ourselves? I can't tell you what bad websites are doing that are being hosted in your space, because I don't want my personal information, and they ask for your name and your email and your phone number and a bunch of other stuff, and they give that to the web host, and they give it to the website owner, who is the guy running the phishing attack. I don't want him knowing my name, because how quick, how easy is it going to be for someone to just, decide that they want to pay some service to swat me at home? I don't want that. So let's work together. Let's fix this problem as well. So these are my principles, and these are things that I think are valid across the board in the security industry, but specifically for this quishing and smishing problem. User choice, consent, and control. It has to be the most important thing. Right now, we are in a downslide, a backslide of rights of users. People feel like they don't own the devices that they paid for, that things could be remotely disabled. We're not just talking about John Deere tractors or the McFlurry machine at McDonald's, right? This is your phones, your laptops. We're at the point now where, if Microsoft decides that you don't have a right license for Windows 11, that they can remotely brick your laptop. Why are we doing this? Let's return control back to the people who paid the money for the device. We're not renting our computers. The mobile OS makers really need to be on board with not monetizing this, because the minute you charge for this, people will say, even if it's a nickel a month, people will say, nope, I'm not going to pay for it. And then we're back to square one. We're in the same problem. This has to be free for everybody. The reputation services, the security companies like the ones that I used to work for and others work for, our reputation databases aren't perfect. They need to be held to high standards. There needs to be an SLA. There needs to be guarantees of accuracy. And there needs to be a process for remediating, if they false positive or false negative on websites, that we can correct that quickly and move on. And then, we're talking about the CDNs and the Cloudflares of the world that, they need to curb this. This is a problem that is enabled through their platform. It is enhanced with their services. And even though their services are beneficial for a lot of websites, this is one where they need to recognize that this is a big problem. So, right, so how do we deal with this? So sometimes we just have to have rules that like require people to follow them. And I know it's not popular these days because we live in an era where government is completely non-functional, but I believe in the idea that we used to have a Federal Trade Commission, Federal Communications Commission, other government agencies and work groups that did regulation on the tech industry. We need to have regulations to guarantee that this is going to happen, and it's going to happen in the right way that benefits everyone. It's not doable without it. And that's a bigger problem that is out of scope for this talk, is how do we get government to be effective again? The good news is in places like here in Colorado, we have a really good, effective state government. But we do need the support of everyone. And we need a government that is going to be working to help us all. So I just will continue beating this drum. I recognize that this is an uphill battle, but I'm extremely stubborn, and I hope that you are too. So I'm just gonna keep haranguing people about this until they finally realize it's the right thing to do, because eventually they will catch up with me. So before I go, there's one more thing I wanted to mention. There's one QR code that is worth scanning, and I noticed it. It was on the pin boards over by the restrooms. There is a group of students at the CU Law School who are working to help lobby state legislators to pass legislation to force them to fund and support the processing of rape kits. It takes now almost 1.5 years in the state of Colorado for a rape kit to be processed, and all the time that is sitting, waiting for it to be done in a lab, the person who may have raped someone has been sort of out in the wild and free and to harm others. So if there is one thing that you want to take away from this talk today that has nothing to do with quishing and smishing, it's that we need to deal with this problem as well. So if you live in Colorado, or you're just willing to throw $5 at these folks who are trying to do a really good thing, you should do that. Kelsey and Angelique are 2 law students here at CU Law. So with that, that is my modest proposal to quash quishing and smash smishing. Thank you. We have a minute for questions before beers, so.
Hi, I had a question more related to kind of the PDF analysis part of the QR code. I haven't really personally looked at this, but like, what does the QR code look like in the actual PDF for like hunting and finding like clusters of like that particular activity?
So there are image processing tools that you can use to read PDFs, and this is one actual like interesting and positive use case for AI. There aren't very many, but this is a good one, is image and pattern recognition. So they just look like generic QR codes. And as a human, I cannot read the content of a QR code and tell you, other than the fact that some of them have logos and some don't, that there's anything unique or different about them. They are often large and contain a lot of bytes so one of the things about QR codes is that they contain extra data and checksums, so that even when part of the QR code is obscured, it's still readable in a device. And these ones have a lot of redundant data. So there is actually repeating patterns that you will notice inside of them, but that isn't something that you can actually see. So when we were working on improving our sandbox to do this analysis, what we just needed was an image parser that could process out what was the content of the QR code, and then it would just redirect that in a side process off to go and look at the reputation service and see if that website was known. And we were doing a lot of that following the redirection chains to get to the end and then doing the reputation lookup. That was basically what we were doing. But I hope that answers your questions. They're big and they have like patterns that look like they repeat within them. Yeah. Anything else? Are we done on time? God knows. Thank you all so much.